note, I really like to acknowledge the project team that beside me was Gunnar Günther, the project leader, and Christoph Lange as the principal investigator, but also the large number of physicians and scientists in the different health facilities. It's not a project that is done by just 2 or 3 people. And lastly, on the last line, we see the names of Cordula Ehlers, Bram Prins, and Nelleke Smitsman, who really were instrumental in support in the administrative area and data management. The last part of the results I want to spend on treatment availability and affordability, and it is actually a little bit of a sidetrack of our clinical cohort, but it was assessed with the help of the clinical cohort. Because at the same time we conducted a survey in 37 European countries, and we asked very simple, which drugs are available for TB and what do they cost? And in the cost we standardized them for a daily dose for a man of 70 kilograms. And then at the point of data analysis we combined all the drugs in standardized regimens. And those standardized regimens had ethambutol and pyrazinamide throughout, with an 8-month intensive phase and a 12-month continuation phase, as was the norm by the time we did this analysis in 2014. These were the regimens we constructed theoretically based on the type of resistance that was shown. But they all use ethionamide, proteonamide, and cycloserine. They had second-line injectable and fluoroquinolones where possible. For example, here we have a pre-XDR with additional resistance to an injectable, so the injectables are then not given. And based on the regimen, we added linezolid, clovesamine, and meropenem, and augmentin. Again, we could have chosen slightly different definitions, but that will not have changed the results. And the first thing that we assessed was, were all these drugs available? Which drugs were available in the country? And again, this is a bit of a busy slide, but we can see here that in all countries, 100% of the countries, we had at least one second-line injectable available and one fluoroquinolone available. But not every country had a group 4 drug, and also not every country had a group 5 drug. So if we then within the groups, the individual drugs vary markedly what was available or not. So only a small number of countries had clovesamine available, but more countries had linezolid, for example. And with the second-line injectable, kanamycin was only present in a very limited number of countries. If you put all these data together, it actually provided a rather shocking picture, because we could show that only 84% of the countries in Europe was able to construct an MDR regimen based on the data of availability. And when we talk about XDR regimens, less than half of the countries had all drugs available for a standardized XDR regimen. So availability of drugs in Europe is a problem. And then if we project now these data on the short course regimen of Bangladesh, where it is the kanamycin, which is a key drug, moxifloxacin and proteonamide are key drugs, that even if you are eligible for a short course regimen in Europe, based on these data, it's very unlikely that the drugs are available to make such a short course regimen. So if we put all the costs for the drugs together, we can combine them in the cost for a typical regimen, being either drug sensitive TB or drug resistant TB. We calculated the cost of a full course of a regimen in international dollars and euro. It depends which column you wish to like. With international dollar, it's easier to compare countries. And the price of a full course of XDR the mean was 124,000, although the range of a course of XDR-TB in international dollars was very, very wide. So it is not the exact numbers that are impressive, but what struck us is that the big steps, the big incremental step in cost with additional resistance in the patients. Now the question then becomes, are these drugs, these costs for these regimens, are they affordable? And for the affordability, we used annual GDP. And again, this is a busy slide. I will take you through it. First to notice is that the y-axis is cut at 2 points, able to get all the graphs on the table. And there's a line at 100%. So actually what we calculated is 1 month worth of the cost of 1 month of treatment. How many months of the GDP of a country will that represent? These are all the countries that are in the survey, and we ordered them to their annual gross domestic product, with here low GDP in Moldova, and here the very high GDP in Luxembourg. And then we have the different regimens. In black we have the sensitive TB, in green the MDR-TB, in the blue and the purple the two versions of the pre-XDR-TB, and in the red actually the XDR-TB. And we can see in one go that in the countries with a low GDP, there is no blue, there is no purple, and there is no red. Those countries are not having a full regimen for pre-XDR or XDR treatment. In the countries with a median group of GDP, those drugs are available, these regimens are available, but pre-XDR and XDR cost more than 100% of a month's GDP of the country, which in our opinion is completely unaffordable. So in one graph we can see the absence of drugs and the high cost of drugs, and most likely non-affordability of the drugs. So the conclusions are that there's inadequate availability of treatment regimen, especially for the more complex profiles, especially in the countries with a high TB incidence, and there's a rapid increase in costs with increase in drug resistance. And in most countries, 1 month of treatment for pre-XDR, XDR is larger than 1 month's GDP per capita. So what are the main limitations? Using routine data in a cohort like this, it is data as given. There are no fixed requirements. We tried to have every site fill in data at least once every 6 months. Sometimes it happens, most of the times that did not happen. And data that is not there is non-informative, because it will lead to potentially missing information. Are all treatment changes captured? Are all resistance testing captured? We kept training the sites, and they keep reassuring us that everything is there, but there's no way that we can test it. Another limitation, and that had to do partly with the data management problems we had, it took a long time to analyze the data. This was a severely underfunded project, although it was under FP7, and the data management became very complex based on the decisions that were made And the interpretation of the results today, of course, suffers from different insights and opinions about treatment strategies that are now rapidly changing. For example, in the time of the cohort, nobody used bedaquiline, nobody used delamanid, and the use of linezolid, for example, was very limited. So as a final remark, we still think that these routine data provide a wealth of information on the management of TB, and it also identifies clear inequalities with regards to diagnostic and treatment. But great care needs to be given to data capture forms and strategy. I would myself advocate offline data entry. By the time we were designing it, those were not available, but now there are multiple packages that offer offline data entry with batch uploading that would really facilitate the sites in collecting the data. And I think that these routine data is always a trade-off between feasibility and completeness. We always want to know everything, but sites can only provide so much, and that this is a very difficult trade-off, and that should not be taken lightly right from the start of the design of such a cohort. And I think that the amount of data that you want to collect should be driven by a priori research question. We had an idea what we wanted to do, but it was loosely defined, and that resulted in collecting data that in the end was not even used for data analysis. And I think that is not only inefficient, it's actually also not all that ethical, because you still have people collecting all these data. So a clear discussion on trade-off between feasibility and completeness and what is needed would drive further implementation or a new implementation of a cohort. And with these final remarks, I like to close the presentation, and I'd like to thank you for your patience and interest.